Alright, number 3, we have a negative on the outside, and then we have square root of negative 196. The negative on the outside, we're going to leave it. It's not going to become an imaginary, kind of like the one does on the inside. It's on the outside. It's just like a regular negative. So I'm going to first rewrite this negative as an I. So we have a negative. I'm going to pull that out, and it's going to become I. So we've got a negative I. And then we have square root of 196. And the square root of 196 is equal to 14. So we have negative I, and then this is times 14. And I like to put the number out front. So this is equal to negative 14I. Okay, number 4. So we have in parentheses a negative I, and then it's squared, and then we have square root of negative 49. Okay, so let's talk about where the I comes from and what I squared is, because we'll be using that quite a bit. So when you have a square root of a negative 1, for example, it becomes an I, and I square root of 1, and then the square root of 1 is just 1. So it just ends up being I. So when you have a square root of negative 1, that's where I comes from. Now there's 4 iterations. You have I squared, you have I to the third, and you have I to the fourth. I is just I by itself. It comes from square root of negative 1. I squared, imagine if you squared this. Square and square root will cancel out. You will end up with negative 1. So I squared is equal to negative 1. And then when you do I to the third, it's like taking I squared and adding another I to it. So you just end up with negative I, not negative 1. And then I to the fourth is like taking 2 of these. So negative 1 times negative 1 will give you just a positive 1. So there's 4 iterations of I that we go through. Most important one that you'll see most of the time is the I squared. So remember that I squared equals negative 1. We'll be changing that quite a bit. And then for the other terms, sometimes these will pop up, and we'll need to change those into different forms. Now, anything above 4 will just repeat. So you go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then when you get I to the 5th, it's the same thing as this. 6 is the same as this. 7th, 8th, 9th, and just continue going down that pattern. So right here, we have a negative I squared. So we're going to do negative times a negative. It's going to be a positive, and then we'll write this as I squared. So all together, this becomes a positive I squared. And then there's going to be an I come out of here. And then we have a square root of 49. So I squared times I will give us I cubed. Or you can write this as I squared, which is negative 1 times I. It's going to be the same result. Negative 1 times I is negative I, and I cubed, as we talked about, is negative I. So we're going to do the square root of 49, which is 7, and then we're going to rewrite this. So this is going to be negative I, so I'm going to write negative 7I. So we get negative 7I for this term.